a young woman only 24 years old. Long black hair, eyes once brimming with hope. She believed she would live happily, just like any other bride. But less than a year after her wedding, her body was found in her husband's own home. Her neck bruised dark, blood spreading across the floor. And the reason? Simply because the dowry was insufficient. Simply because her family was poor. Behind the closed doors of that two-story house in a rural village near Lucknow lay a crime cold and brutal. A daughter-in-law murdered for extra dowry. The killer was no stranger. They were the ones she once held close. Her husband and in-laws. The Ruby Devi case, not just a family homicide. It is a dark testament to a tragedy still thriving in many Indian villages, where a woman's life is valued in wedding gifts. Ruby Devi, born in 2001, was the youngest daughter in a poor working-class family on the outskirts of Lucknow, Uttar Pradesh, India. Her father was a tailor. Her mother sold vegetables at the market. Although far from affluent, Ruby's family always struggled to raise their children with care and frugality. From childhood, Ruby was taught that a woman's happiness depended on a good marriage. She had little formal education, but she knew how to be polite, capable, and always dreamed of a peaceful home. In 2023, just on her 22nd birthday, she was arranged to marry a man named Ramesh Yadav from a village over 30 kilometers away. He worked at a small private firm, owned his own house, and lived with his parents. Ramesh's family was considered well-off, stable finances, land ownership, and standing in the community. So when they demanded dowry, a new motorcycle, 5 tolas of gold, and cash of 200,000 rupees, Ruby's parents struggled, but managed somehow. The wedding took place in November 2023. Ruby left her childhood home, carrying her few saris, her belongings, and dreams of starting her own family. She didn't know that from the moment she stepped into her in-laws' home, her life would enter a completely different chapter. A chapter without love, without kindness, only pressure, contempt, and daily verbal torment. Why is the dowry so little? Are your parents stingy? Ruby Devi moved into her husband's home immediately after the wedding. The 2-story house stood at the edge of the village with a small courtyard with a few flower pots and a shared kitchen in the back. In the beginning, Ruby still wore a gentle expression, trying to fit in, fulfilling her new daughter dutiful role. Every morning she woke at dawn to sweep the courtyard, cook for the household, wash clothes, and help her mother-in-law prepare meals. She didn't complain, didn't protest when given orders. To Ruby, being a hard-working daughter-in-law seemed normal. But what was not normal were the words. Her mother-in-law, Mrs. Sushila, was dissatisfied from the beginning. She would drop biting remarks. Only a little dowry. Why don't you ask your parents to borrow extra? Who rides such a cheap motorcycle? Ruby's husband, Ramesh, initially was patient, but within a month he became distant. There were no more gentle check-ins, no evening conversations. Whenever he entered the house, he would stare at his phone and go to sleep. Ruby tried to start talks, make his favorite dishes, but she was met with a frown and icy silence. The pressure intensified. The in-laws implied they demanded more dowry to save face with relatives. They said, "If you want to live peacefully in this household, tell your parents to fix this." A poor family daughter-in-law trying to marry into a prestigious one. Know your place. Ruby dared not say anything to her birth family. She feared worrying them, feared being told she was a complaining newlywed. She gradually became quieter. Dark circles formed under her eyes. Her voice softened, and the rare smile on that young face vanished. But it was only the beginning. 1 week before the tragedy, neighbors heard a loud argument from Ramesh's house. Ruby was accused of dishonoring the in-laws when she told a friend by phone that she was unhappy. That night, she was kicked out into the yard in the freezing air. The next day, she cooked as usual, still silently enduring. No one knew that at that moment the only question in her mind was, what did I do wrong? And no one guessed this would be Ruby Devi's last week alive. April 2025. The outskirts of Lucknow were baking under the fierce sun. Heat radiated off the road, stifling even the already oppressive atmosphere inside the house. But for Ruby Devi, the outside heat was nothing compared to the freeze inside. In the month before her death, Ruby called her mother 3 times, her voice cracking, choking. She would say she was fine, but her mother, a woman of experience, sensed something was wrong. She offered to visit, but Ruby brushed it off, saying, "I'm busy here. I'm fine. Don't worry." At the same time, the in-laws continued pressuring. If Ruby's family didn't provide another 100,000 rupees, they'd be sent away, or worse, something bad would happen. Ramesh started becoming violent. At one point, he threw Ruby's phone on the floor simply because she refused to call home and ask for more money. The crack in the tile remains a silent scar in the house. On April 17th, neighbors heard a heavy crash and a woman crying uncontrollably for nearly 15 minutes. Someone knocked on the door. Ruby's mother-in-law opened it calmly, saying, "Nothing, just a normal marital argument." But that evening, Ruby didn't come out to the yard. No watering plants, no hanging laundry. The second-floor door remained closed. She stayed inside alone all night. The next morning, a neighbor called over the fence. "Ruby, are you home, dear?" No reply, just wind. The heavy silence hinted that something terribly wrong was about to happen. And then, within 48 hours, Ruby Devi's body was discovered. Her pain ended. A shocking investigation began. Morning of April 19, 2025, around 7:30 a.m. A call was placed from Ramesh Yadav's phone to the local police. He stated succinctly, "My wife hung herself in her room. Please come immediately." When police arrived, the house was eerily quiet. Neighbors had not been alerted. The second-floor room door was already open. From the ceiling fan hung a piece of cloth, and underneath lay the body of Ruby Devi. She wore an old sari, barefoot, hair disheveled, eyes wide open, vacant. There were bruises on her neck, but investigators were struck by the bruises on her arms and a blood accumulation at the back of her skull. No chair, no prop. Nothing was present for her to climb. The floor beneath her was smooth, no footprints, no broken stool, nothing she'd have used to hang herself. One investigator whispered to another, "This doesn't make sense. There's nothing to climb. And those bruises not from hanging." During initial questioning on site, Ramesh appeared flustered. He said his wife had locked her room all night. When he didn't see her in the morning, he broke in. However, the lock showed no signs of being forced. Everything inside was tidy, except the bedsheet slightly displaced and a small bloodstain at the bed's edge. In the preliminary autopsy report, experts noted, there were marks consistent with strangulation by hand before staging a hanging. The bruise at the back of the head suggested impact. Time of death estimated around 3 a.m. Ruby did not commit suicide. She was murdered. Once that conclusion was reached, suspicion immediately fell on 3 people in the house: her husband, Ramesh, her mother-in-law, Sushila, and her father-in-law, Gopal. A coldly calculated murder disguised as suicide, but they had miscalculated. Ruby's death would not be silenced. It sparked an investigation that rocked that small village. When Ruby Devi's death news spread through the village, the first to react wasn't the in-laws, but an elderly neighbor named Ram Prakash, who had seen Ruby being verbally abused numerous times. He refused to believe it was suicide. Just hours after the body was taken downstairs, he pedaled over on his bicycle to Ruby's birth parents nearly 35 kilometers away and broke the news. Her parents stood stunned. Her mother wept in silence. Her father, a gaunt man with prematurely gray hair, repeated only she would never do that. Never. That afternoon, they went directly to the police station to file a complaint. In their statement, they declared, "We were asked for more dowry. Our daughter often called crying. We believe she was murdered." That short, choked complaint became the key that turned the investigation from suicide to organized murder. The police chief and a special investigative team were dispatched to re-examine the crime scene. They sifted through every blanket, examined wall scratches, and measured the distance from the ceiling fan to the floor. Everything pointed to one conclusion: Ruby could not have hanged herself. She was beaten, strangled, and later hung to stage a suicide. Neighbors began recounting moments they'd seen, her being scolded in the courtyard for not calling money home, locked outside late at night. One elderly woman said she once saw Ruby crying behind a banana bush. All those seemingly minor details began to form a mosaic of a horror, a crime beyond denial. On April 21st, after the preliminary autopsy report and multiple witness statements, the police officially reclassified the case as homicide. The house where Ruby once lived was sealed, and the three, her husband, mother-in-law, and father-in-law, were formally summoned. Immediately after the case was redirected toward a homicide investigation, the forensic team from Lucknow City was dispatched to the scene. They worked through the night at the victim's house, once the loving home of a newlywed girl, now transformed into a chilling crime scene. The scene was not much disturbed, but that very excessive neatness made the investigative team suspicious. The cloth used for the hanging was seized for examination. It was an old scarf, washed but still bearing the scent of soap. On it were the fingerprints of 3 people, including the victim's mother-in-law. Next to the bed, a small blot of blood was discovered smearing on the cement floor. The blood sample matched Ruby completely. This blood stain was believed to have been caused by an impact to the back of the neck before she was strangled. There was no chair in the room, no footprints or scraping marks that could indicate she climbed up to the ceiling fan herself. This was the critical point. The forensic team concluded the victim could not have committed suicide. All signs indicated this was a stage scene, arranged to mislead the investigation. Ruby's body was transferred to the Central Hospital for autopsy. The final report stated clearly, cause of death, asphyxiation due to strangulation. Presence of blood accumulation at the nape of the neck and left shoulder, signs of being struck before death. No scratch marks or injuries from an attempt at self-hanging. Time of death coincided with around 3 a.m. on April 19th. Under the victim's fingernails, technicians discovered a thin skin sample, likely the result of a resistance struggle. This sample was subsequently sent for DNA testing. In a handwritten forensic report, the doctor wrote a brief but haunting line. Not a suicide. This is a premeditated murder, staged, and the victim had absolutely no chance of survival. With clear forensic evidence, the in-laws' lies gradually crumbled. Ruby Devi's death was no longer a question. It was a crime, and justice began to be set in motion. Immediately after the forensic report was completed, Lucknow City Police, in coordination with the Special Investigative Agency, officially embarked on a full-scale investigation. The goal, to clarify who killed Ruby Devi and why. The 3 main suspects, Ramesh Yadav, the victim's husband, Mrs. Sushila, the mother-in-law, and Mr. Gopal, the father-in-law, were summoned for separate interrogations. Right from the start, they offered identical narratives. She hanged herself. The door was locked. We know nothing. But the investigators were not easily deceived. Ramesh's phone data showed he was inside the house throughout the night. No emergency call was placed before 7:30 a.m., the time he called the police. If he had truly discovered his wife dead earlier, why didn't he report it immediately? When asked why he didn't break down the door sooner, Ramesh stammered. An investigator recorded in internal files. He showed no sadness, no anger, no remorse. Every reaction was too cold, too measured, as though rehearsed beforehand. Meanwhile, the mother-in-law's testimony, Mrs. Sushila, contained many inconsistencies. She said that night Ruby had dinner normally, but couldn't recall what she was wearing. She said, "I went to sleep early, so I don't know what happened." But the house had only one downstairs and one upstairs, so she could not have failed to hear anything. The police also approached neighbors to gather testimonies. Many confirmed hearing cries on the night of the incident, but didn't dare to check because they were used to it. Some said they heard Mrs. Sushila curse her daughter-in-law for not bringing enough dowry. The investigation dramatically shifted when the DNA test results came back. The skin sample under the victim's fingernails matched Ramesh's. This was evidence that Ruby had tried to resist, and the one she struggled with was her husband. At that point, Ramesh began to falter. In the third interrogation, when confronted with the DNA evidence and crime scene photographs, he lost composure. He began to cry, not out of remorse, but out of fear. He confessed, "I didn't try to kill her. I just wanted to scare her. She said she would go back to her mother's house if I mentioned dowry again. I lost control." But when asked who came up with the idea to stage a hanging to fake a suicide, he fell silent. A moment later, the mother-in-law was the one to speak. "I just didn't want the neighbors gossiping. If they knew the daughter-in-law killed herself because she was being abused, what would become of this family's honor?" That sentence struck like a slap to those who heard it not out of remorse but because of honor. And that very statement reinforced the investigators' determination. They had to bring this case into the light. On April 25, 2025, just 6 days after Ruby Devi's death, Lucknow police officially issued arrest warrants for the 3 main suspects: Ramesh Yadav, the husband; Mrs. Sushila Devi, the mother-in-law; and Mr. Gopal Yadav, the father-in-law. That morning, a police vehicle stopped in front of the house where the crime had occurred. Neighbors stood silently watching from afar. No one spoke. Not a single cry, not a single tear from the arrested family. Ramesh was handcuffed first. As he stepped out of the house, he lowered his head, not daring to look at anyone. A policeman said, "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say will be used in court." Ramesh did not respond. Mrs. Sushila was brought out afterward, her face still calm as if nothing had to do with her. When asked if she had anything to say, she only replied, "We didn't do anything. She died by herself." Mr. Gopal was trembling, seemingly not fully understanding what was happening, but according to the investigation, he had not prevented his son during the incident, and even helped in staging the crime scene. His silence was part of the crime. All 3 were taken to the police station and held in separate detention. The police recorded in the arrest report, 3 suspects are detained under Section 302 of the Indian Penal Code murder, along with charges related to staging the crime scene and dowry pressure. Local media quickly reported the news. The next morning, newspapers flashed headlines: "Daughter-in-law dies over dowry, entire in-law family arrested." The case shocked the region. Many who knew Ruby came to the police station demanding justice for the young woman. A senior investigator told the press, "We will not let this case be swept under the rug. This is not just a murder, it is a warning to families still holding on to outdated beliefs." The arrest of the 3 suspects marked a major turning point in the case. From then on, the process of questioning, evidence collection, and formal prosecution intensified more than ever. After being arrested, the 3 suspects were separated for interrogation. The investigative team focused on clarifying who directly committed the crime, who was complicit, and each person's role in staging the scene. Ramesh Yadav, the husband, was the first to be interrogated. In the first 24 hours, he was nearly completely silent, his eyes lifeless, his face exhausted. But when the investigators presented the DNA result matching the sample under the victim's fingernails, Ramesh began to break down. After nearly 10 hours of continuous questioning, he admitted, "I strangled her. But I didn't intend to kill her. I just wanted to scare her, make her stop. She kept yelling that she would go back to her mother's house. I lost control." That confession was swiftly refuted. Because if it was only loss of control, why stage a crime scene? Why not call for help immediately? When asked further, Ramesh bowed his head, remained silent. But that silence was a form of admission. Meanwhile, Mrs. Sushila Devi, the mother-in-law, was unnaturally calm. She denied all accusations, claiming the daughter-in-law was weak, prone to negative thoughts, and that she had counseled her many times. However, when confronted with neighbor statements and an audio recording capturing screams on the night of the murder, she began to show vulnerabilities. An investigator noted in the record, she did not shed a single tear when speaking about her daughter-in-law's death. It was as if it was someone else's story, unrelated. Mr. Gopal Yadav, the father-in-law, was also interrogated. He claimed to know nothing, but traces in the house indicated he had helped Ramesh move the body and tie the rope to the fan. When asked why he did that, He quietly said, "I was afraid my son would go to prison. I didn't want our family to lose honor." In the interrogation file, police wrote, 3 people, 1 killer, 2 accomplices. No one stood with the victim. No one stood with justice. They only stood by each other. Statements from Ruby's maternal family, neighbors, combined with Ramesh's confession and the crime scene evidence were enough to complete the prosecution files. After completing the rounds of interrogation, the investigative team embarked on the most critical step: synthesizing and consolidating the entire case file to submit to the prosecution. This was the decisive stage when all evidence, testimonies, and forensic data had to be linked into a coherent, undeniable chain. The first document was the forensic report, confirming the victim died due to strangulation, not suicide. The bruising on the nape, injuries on the skin, and strangulation marks were irrefutable proof that Ruby was murdered. Next was the DNA sample under the victim's fingernails matching Ramesh Yadav, evidence that the victim had struggled before death, completely refuting the she committed suicide claim. Witness statements were also organized in logical sequence, from Ramesh's partial confession, to contradictions in Sushila's and Gopal's statements, to matching details from neighbors. All pointing to a single conclusion: this was an organized, deliberate, accomplice murder. Additionally, police included an audio recording of the argument on the night of the murder recorded by neighbors, crime scene photos highlighting inconsistencies, phone records showing no emergency calls were made immediately after the victim's death, testimonies from the maternal family who had been pressured for more dowry. The case file was packaged into more than 300 pages of documentation, categorized by forensics, witnesses, physical evidence, interrogation, and investigative conclusions. On May 2, 2025, the entire file was submitted to the District Criminal Court in preparation for trial. The prosecution officially charged the 3 defendants under Section 302 of the Indian Penal Code murder, along with Section 304B dowry-related cruelty leading to death. Ruby Devi, 24 years old, died due to murder by her husband and in-laws for reasons related to dowry. The case contains all elements constituting organized, premeditated murder. On June 14, 2025, the first hearing of the Ruby Devi case officially took place at the District Criminal Court of Lucknow. The courtroom was small but packed with citizens, journalists, and local human rights groups. They came not just to hear a verdict, but to witness whether justice truly exists. The 3 defendants, Ramesh Yadav, Sushila Devi, and Gopal Yadav, appeared in prison attire, heads bowed. No arrogance remained, no defenses left. Before them now stood the judge, the prosecutor, and the victim's family, eyes red, holding Ruby's small photograph. The prosecution presented the entire sequence of events. They systematically introduced the forensic report confirming cause of death was strangulation, DNA data matching the sample under the victim's fingernails, Ramesh's confession and details of staging the crime scene, witness statements on dowry pressure and repeated abuse. The prosecutor emphasized, this was not a crime of passion, but the result of oppression, calculation, and inhuman coldness. The defense attorneys attempted to turn the tide. They cited that Ramesh lost control and claimed the in-laws knew nothing of the incident. But every piece of evidence from bloodstains, DNA, testimonies, to the scene itself was too clear to deny. Throughout the nearly month-long trial, not a single tear came from the defendant's family. No apology, no remorse. On July 12, 2025, the court delivered its verdict. Ramesh Yadav, life imprisonment without parole. Sushila Devi and Gopal Yadav, each 20 years in prison for complicity and staging the crime scene. The courtroom fell silent. Ruby's family wept. They were not joyous, no sentence could bring their daughter back. But at least the truth was spoken. The murderer could no longer walk free. The judge ended the trial with a short but haunting remark. If dowry becomes the price for life, then it is no longer marriage, but a contract trading lives. And that contract has today been torn apart before the law. Ruby Devi, a girl of only 24 years, left this world in injustice, within 4 walls that should have been her home. She didn't die of illness, didn't die in an accident, but because of greed, prejudice, and cruelty within her husband's own house. Her death left a deep wound in her parents' hearts, humble people who only ever hoped their daughter would have a peaceful life. They didn't ask for fame, only peace, but they also couldn't protect their daughter from evil hands. And more than anything, this is not just a case. It's a mirror reflecting a shocking reality where archaic customs like dowry and the silence toward domestic violence continue to covertly kill women day by day. Ruby's story forces us to ask ourselves, how many more women will suffer in silence? How many lives will continue to be exchanged for what's called honor or money? Justice arrived for Ruby, belated but clear, and the price of silence is a life as a human being. May this case empower more people to speak up, to dare to protect themselves or loved ones from crime, and above all, to dare to say no to what should never have existed in the first place.